conversation, that is the focus. Poetry, it's about the language. And the description for prose, it's about the narrative, the story. And so he's telling us this story of meeting a neighbor, a blind neighbor, and what ensues. You saw a couple of things there that you need to be familiar with. At the very beginning, he comes out and he's got his book in his hand. You gotta have that manuscript. That's a rule. You gotta have it doesn't have to be in a black book. There's no rule that says it has to be in a black binder, although that's all you'll ever see anyone use. But in theory, it could be on your iPod or your BlackBerry or written on a piece of cardboard. But I'm not recommending that. And you see what we call a teaser. He gives you a little snippet of the literature to sort of draw you in, to intrigue you, to get you curious about what's going on here. That is not a requirement in a prose piece. Again, it's so popular that it might almost seem that way, but there's no requirement that you have a teaser. You could just start with an introduction, but it's pretty popular to start off with a little snippet, anywhere from 20 seconds to maybe a minute of a little excerpt of the piece designed to draw the audience in. The same way television commercials show you a few shots of the show before it happens, so they kind of suck you in. They want you to watch more. And then he closes the book, and then he delivers his introduction, and that's something that you're going to write yourself. It's an original introduction, and you just deliver it. You're not in character. It's just you as a public speaker. It's your chance to show off your ability just as a speaker. And you use that introduction to set up the piece. And usually, there's a few different things in the handout you'll see. You're trying to get their attention and so forth, set whatever context you need to. But generally, you want to put forth some sort of a theme or an argument, a claim. What you're doing is you're providing a lens through which to view this literature for the audience. You're giving them something to focus on. And in this case, he talked about relationships and how sometimes once we go through relationships, we have to interpret it when it's all over and make sense out of it as a way perhaps to restore our identity or whatever. And you have to look for something in the piece of literature that you want to put forth as, this is the meaning of this piece. This is what we learn from watching or from watching you perform this or from reading this literature. When you're trying to write your introduction, ask yourself that. Once you've read through the piece a few times, what do we learn from this? What's its message? What is it teaching us? And if you can say that in a sentence or two, you're probably moving in the direction of discovering a theme for that piece. Now that may change, because as you get to know your literature better, you may think you know it really well at your first tournament, but when you've done it for another month or two, you're going to have new insights. This is a process. You're going through until April at Nationals, and you're going to have new insights into the characters and why they say what they do and what they're doing and what this all means. And as a result, your intro may change. And that may change everything. I'd love to tell the story of one of my students. She had this prose piece that she was doing, and she was a really good performer. And she was doing okay with it. She was being successful. It was called Novice Bitch. Take that, Boyer. And it was funny, and it involved pulling a child's underwear out of a dog's anus and things like that. It was pretty funny. And all year she's doing it, and she's breaking to final round. She's being fairly successful with it. The tournament before the national qualifying tournament, the district tournament, one of the judges saw it and said, in your intro, you were saying this is something about, mothers and daughters, and she said, I don't really think that's what this is about. I think this is about what we would do for acceptance. And when we got the ballot back, we looked at it and it was like, holy smoke. It's not what we said. It's the edited version for YouTube. And it was like, oh my God, she's so right. We had heard this piece literally hundreds of times. She had worked so hard on it. And we were missing that. We didn't really have the essence of this piece. It was about something different than what we thought about it, that meaning, that message, that theme. And in the 2 weeks before districts, she rewrote the intro and memorized it. And she wound up being district champion 2 weeks later with the same exact piece, the same exact performance, except a different introduction that focused on a different element in this story. That it just made the experience of the literature as an audience member a completely different one, because we were looking for something different, because that intro had us looking for something different. So please don't underestimate the importance of your intro. And don't Don't be satisfied that it's done because you have an intro. Keep thinking about it. One of the things that you really need to do as a performer is to analyze the literature. Students are often very concerned about performing the literature. And they'll even say something like, oh, I have this character. This character needs a voice. You know, how should I do that voice? And they're worried about the performance of those lines. And they're getting ahead of themselves. If you want to know how that character speaks, you have to analyze that character. You have to ask questions about who is that person? How do they feel about the person they're talking to? How do they feel about the space that they're in? Is it cold? Because if they're cold, their feet are cold because they're wet and they're walking through the rain, they're going to talk a little differently. They may shiver a little bit. They're going to stand a little bit differently. And so it's not a matter of, oh, the voice should sound like this. It's going deeper than that, because it's not a voice. It's a person saying words and based on thoughts that they're having. So you really need to dig deeply into the characters and the plot. And I've given you a series of questions to ask that will force you to think about it. And where you're looking is in the literature. You know, for the word forensics, it comes from some ancient language. Latin, Greek, one of the ancient languages. But one meaning of it is to argue from evidence. And we think of arguing from evidence as something debaters might do. But interpreters argue from evidence. But your evidence is in the literature. When there's a sentence in there that says, you know, he had been born in Brooklyn. That's evidence. He's from Brooklyn. How does that person from Brooklyn talk? You know, these, them, those, the other ones. You know, after dinner, we'll go for a walk. You know, let's talk. But maybe he comes from Brooklyn, but he moved to New Jersey when he was 4 years old, so he doesn't talk like that. The point is you're looking for the evidence in there, and that's what's driving your performance. It's all based on analysis. If you don't analyze the characters and the plot and what's really going on there, the setting, all of that stuff, you wind up with just random characterizations. And that's kind of surfacey. When it's done really well, there's depth to it, and we feel like we're hearing real people speak, people with personalities and identities, not just someone saying words with a voice. So, got an introduction. It's usually an introduction, and then you see the rest of the piece. Do you have questions? Are there things that you saw there that, besides the not being able to hear, that you want to question?
Yes. Like, not even question. I just want to comment on the nonverbal communications. Like, a lot of the